sent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Again, I'm so excited to be here with you all. My apologies that I couldn't make it in person. However, life will life, and sometimes we have to adjust. And I just appreciate the opportunity to adjust and to still be able to come and speak with you tonight. As I was saying before, Mark has been planning this for nearly a year, and I was really excited that Southern Poverty Law Center was extended an invitation to be a part of this work. Mark actually was in Montgomery visiting the Civil Rights Memorial Center, and that's how our paths cross. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of put my slides up because I'll start talking and forget that that's what I'm supposed to be doing, and I don't want to forget that. So just a little bit about myself, as Mark wanted me to share. I am a native Alabamian. I have spent the greater part of my life in social justice work. Fresh out of college, I graduated from Troy State University in Troy, Alabama, and I started working for Southern Poverty Law Center in 1996. Worked for them for 11 years, and then I left and I was doing housing justice work for 10 years, and then returned to Southern Poverty Law Center in 2019. Really looking forward to a shift in their work and with more intention being given to the Deep South. So, when I first started working for Southern Poverty Law Center, I actually began working in the Intelligence Project. The Intelligence Project, I was a research analyst monitoring the activity of white supremacist organizations throughout the country, and actually had an opportunity to work on some notable cases that you may be familiar with. One of them was the case against the Aryan Nations in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Was a lead researcher on that, and also had an opportunity to go out to Coeur d'Alene while and observe that court proceeding. And we received a great victory where we were able to disrupt and bankrupt the Aryan Nations and secured their headquarters that they had used for years. And also worked on the James Byrd case in Jasper, Texas, and just several others. But that work continues to really impact me during my early years. And being a person who was born and raised in the Deep South, in Alabama specifically, I've always wanted to work to really improve the state of Alabama and really improve the outcomes of Alabamians, specifically Black, poor Alabamians that are oftentimes the target of a lot of the laws and legislation that we see passed throughout. So fast forward to where we are today. I returned to Southern Poverty Law Center in 2019. I am now the director of SPLC's Alabama State Office, and I'll talk more about the state office and the why behind that. And I just wanted to spend a few moments just for those of you who aren't familiar with Southern Poverty Law Center to share with you what our theory of change is for Southern Poverty Law Center. Southern Poverty Law Center was founded in 1971. The founders of the organization, both native to Montgomery, Alabama, or the surrounding areas, both graduates of the University of Alabama Law School, returned to Montgomery to open up this practice. And I think the piece that people oftentimes forget about is that it actually started as a private law firm where they really wanted to take on litigation where they were seeing disparities with the lack of enforcement of of things that should have occurred at the passage of the civil rights movement. And they wanted to ensure that the promise of the civil rights movement would become a reality for all. And so some of the earlier cases that they took on, one being against the local YMCA who refused to allow Blacks to swim in their swimming pool. And Southern Poverty Law Center took on that case, and in response to the judge's ruling that they had to allow, the YMCA actually filled the pool up with sand. And so SPLC continued to do that work. They also worked on some educational cases where segregation was still very prevalent in a lot of the schools in Alabama. And they also took on a case where I'm not sure if you all are familiar, but with the Relf sisters, the Relf sisters were sterilized against their parents' wishes. And so Southern Poverty Law Center also took on that case, and it became a landmark case where, of course, those who were on government assistance, they were being targeted unfairly and were being sterilized. And so our co-founder, Joseph Levin, actually argued that case. And again, just that was the early phases of the organization. They later became a nonprofit organization and their scope of work expanded. And that is one of the cases in Alabama really shifted that work. And that's when Southern Poverty Law Center used a very unique practice. It wasn't new because it actually had been tried prior to SPLC taking on this case. However, it was one of the first that was more notable, and that was the case of Michael Donnell. Michael Donnell was abducted in Mobile, Alabama, by the United Klans of America, by members of the United Klans of America. They took him away from his neighborhood. They brutally murdered him and then returned him back near his neighborhood and put him and hung him in a tree. Southern Poverty Law Center, after the criminal case, they sued in civil court to bankrupt the United Klans of America. And I want to back up and say, oftentimes SPLC is credited with a lot of the on the ground work. And while the attorneys did an amazing job of litigating that case, ensuring that the individuals who perpetrated that harm on that community, the family that murdered Michael Donnell, that they would also pay outside of the criminal charges. But it was really the work of leaders in community who refuse to be silenced by the threats or the intimidation because they wanted to see justice prevail in this case. And so, Michael Figures, who was leading the NAACP at that time, and his brother, who was working in local government, continued to mobilize the community and equipping them with tools and resources so that this wouldn't die. And really, if it had not been for the collective work that the community was doing, the case wouldn't have risen to the level of gathering the attention of regional and then national attention. So that is also one of the earlier cases that really shifted the work of Southern Poverty Law Center, that led to them doing more work. And they then started what is now the Intelligence Project. But at that time, it was Klan Watch, to monitor and expose the activities of racist organizations. Later, after founding the Intelligence Project, they also founded Teaching Tolerance, which is now Learning for Justice. And again, really looking at ways that we can build power in communities from a multi-pronged approach, and also understanding, the shift, and that it wasn't just going to be litigation that impacted and changed the way in which we were in community with each other. So now a little bit about the six offices, but I can't start that conversation without first acknowledging this memorial that sits out in front of our office building. The memorial out front, designed by Maya Lin, is actually dedicated. It was monument, the first monument of its kind dedicated to civil rights martyrs in this country. And the Civil Rights Memorial Center is a reminder for us of what has happened in the past, but it's also a reminder of ways in which we need to be looking forward and creating a path forward. And so I always like to start there, in remembrance of those whose lives were taken because they were fighting for my right to be here, my right to live in community, free from oppression and free from discriminatory laws. And so I just want to acknowledge the memorial that sits out front in in front of our building, designed by Maya Lin. So a little bit about the state office. As I stated before, the state offices are very new to Southern Poverty Law Center. The first state office was Mississippi, which is now in its third year, and Alabama, we're in our first, and we just announced a state office in Georgia. Realizing that in order for SPLC to do the work that it does, we have to be in close relationship with community. And so the state office were designed to employ an integrative advocacy framework. And that means that we work in community and we start with community. And then we branch out alongside and with community so that we work with our expertise inside SPLC and we deploy resources, capacity, education, and tools within communities. We also look at the way in which data informs the work that we do and how it's important for us to invest in a data-driven process so that we're not only sharing narratives, but we're also showing ways in which specifically policies and legislation are continuing to keep disenfranchising individuals throughout the Deep South. And we're working to build a multi-generational model, right? Because we cannot do this work in silos. And we're also building infrastructure on the ground, returning power back to the people, because what we realize is that the power of SPLC should lie in the communities that it serves. And we do that by being intentional and engaged with our community. So the work that we're doing is people informed, and it's informed by issues that are impacting our communities, specifically in the southern states where we have offices. Let's skip that slide. And just a little bit about our Learning for Justice. Some of you may be familiar with Learning for Justice being Teaching Tolerance, which was a magazine that we distributed across the country. It went to educators, administrators, even some colleges and universities also utilize the Learning for Justice materials, their kits, the magazine. So they work with educators, schools, they conduct trainings, and that they also uphold our mission of SPLC of being a catalyst for racial justice in the Deep South. They do that through their magazine, the Teaching Institute. They also do a number of workshops that they host virtually where they're inviting various members of the community in to talk about their relationship and what's happening at the local level, impacting educational policies. And so very grateful to be working alongside our colleagues in Learning for Justice and the work that they are doing ahead. They're also doing Learning for Justice also has curriculum around strengthening our democracy and the role of education in that. And they also have curriculum around teaching the civil rights movement, understanding and teaching hard history, really advocating for accurate history in to be taught in our school systems. And across the country, we're seeing bans of books. We're seeing library boards and library workers being shifted and people advocating to take certain books out of libraries. And Learning for Justice actually provides tools and advocacy training for communities that are grappling with that. And they also work closely with our policy teams as well, especially because we're seeing so much legislation specifically across the Deep South that are targeting educational entities, including schools and libraries. So they do a lot of amazing work in our Learning for Justice. The Intelligence Project, I spoke a lot about that just in sharing a little bit about the work that I did previously when I was at Southern Poverty Law Center, but they monitor hate and extreme and anti-government extremist groups in the United States. And in addition to this map or their year-end hate report, they also work really closely with community groups to combat misinformation and disinformation. One of the projects that I'm especially excited about is Peril. Peril is a curriculum that is being used across the country, helping caregivers, parents, and educators, all with resources and tools to be able to identify when young people are being radicalized, and gives practical approaches to helping counter that information, and also identifying ways in which they can help specifically young people not turn to hate groups or hate group activities. So they do a lot of amazing work. They're also building an interfaith alliance um, programming, and we're actually hosting the first convening in Alabama, where we're bringing together faith-based communities also to combat and counter this Christian white nationalism as well. So they're doing a lot of amazing educational things that are happening in community as well, reflecting back to that multi-pronged integrative approach that I spoke about earlier. And you'll see this weave throughout the presentation, specifically when we get into talking about um, voter rights and voter education, and the way in which we're approaching it from an integrated standpoint within SPLC. So, democracy, the Voting Rights Advocacy and Litigation Impact Team. Our litigation team is broken out into 6 what we call litigation impact teams, or ALIT, is our acronym internally for short. But we have our democracy, voting rights advocacy, we have our children's rights, we have immigration rights, we have the LGBTQIA, we have the criminal justice reform. And so those are body entities that actually do our high impact litigation work in those various sectors. And they're doing some amazing work in partnership with our policy teams and with the state offices around litigation and organizing. And oftentimes what we hear our attorneys say is that they're doing community lawyering. But it's so much more that they're doing in that department. They are committed to strengthening democracy and increasing voter participation, particularly in Black and Brown communities. We know that the right to vote is fundamental to the United States. It's fundamental to this country, and protecting and strengthening that right is key to achieving the multiracial, inclusive democracy that we all envision. And so I'm very grateful for our colleagues who are working throughout the Deep South to combat a lot of the legislation that we've seen, specifically since the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Shelby County, which again, it is Shelby v. Holder. That case was so significant for us in Alabama because it basically gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965, right? And ever since that ruling, legislatures in the Deep South and across the country, they've moved at a rapid pace to implement new laws across restricting voting access. And I don't have to tell you all about the dangers in that and what the results that we've seen from that, especially from people of color, right? And those efforts have since been supercharged in recent years, specifically driven by the 2020 election around the big lie, and then the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. So these types of things continue to limit voting access, and it's also weakening the administration of elections and undermining voters' confidence in democracy. We're already seeing ads, specifically in Alabama, that are filled with a lot of misinformation and disinformation. We recently seen this ad where there was this call to veterans to come out and protect the polls, right? And so this information and this rhetoric continues to fuel our communities, and they are barriers to people coming out and voting. The next case is the Allen v. Milligan case, right? This is, again, a significant case. We were all on pins and needles waiting for the U.S. Supreme Court to rule in this case. This was a redistricting case And we know that redistricting across the country, excuse me, I think we've seen over 70 lawsuits in this area where they are drawing these maps that are not fair. And even after the Supreme Court ruled in our favor, we also had to go back to court in order for a fair map to be drawn. And now we do have the opportunity, because that election is in November 2024, we do have an opportunity for the second congressional district, and also demonstrating what that means to have representation at the state level. And so we're still actively fighting against voter suppression laws in the South. They recently just passed SB 1 in Alabama, which restricts absentee voting, and it makes it criminal. There's a felony charge if you are not first of kin and you assist someone with an absentee ballot. And assisting someone could literally mean that you gave gas money to someone, or you gave them instructions for completing the absentee ballot. So again, looking at who would be disparately impacted by that, overwhelmingly people with disabilities, also people of color who rely on absentee ballot. And a lot of times it is the rural communities that rely on absentee ballots a lot in Alabama. And so these two cases continue to significantly impact voter registration, the ability to get out and vote, and go to the polls. The other thing I do want to add before I move on to this slide is this is all by design, and it is very much intentional in wanting to make it more difficult, one, for people to register to vote, but also the barriers for turning out the vote. And I'll talk a little bit later about a campaign that we're running. It is a combination of a digital campaign and on the ground organizing, so that, and because we want to increase voter turnout. But we also want to speak to the issues of why it's important to vote. So in our voting rights practice group, we do focus, again, I talked about redistricting some, and we do that at the local level, even looking at how redistricting, sorry, has impacted school boards, city councils. One of the things that we also have done in partnership with our Learning for Justice department is also do advocacy training for communities on the ground, to show up at school board meetings, to show up at city council meetings, and also educating them on the process of, redistricting, what the procedures are around redistricting. We have a local community right now in Anniston, Alabama, that basically redistricting was an issue. The notice wasn't done properly, but the community didn't even know what was happening, and it happened so fast. So again, you have a whole voting area that has been disparately impacted by redistricting. And again, just weaponizing that to take away the vote. And then we have the NRVA enforcement. Again, we have partnerships across the Deep South that we have employed, as well as national groups that we employ with, to ensure that access to the ballot box is not restricted, and that people have the opportunity to get out and vote. In addition to that, we are also doing rights restoration work, again, restoring the franchise to returning citizens. I think everyone is familiar with what happened in Florida a couple of years ago with returning citizens and their right to vote. Desmond Meade led a lot of that organizing work in partnership with communities. And Southern Poverty Law Center also signed on to a lawsuit where we were fighting, where the citizens of Florida had voted, and basically that vote was taken away from them at the local level. And I say this oftentimes, every injustice that has ever happened to us in this country has happened at the local level. And so we work diligently with our partners on the ground, restoring the franchise to returning citizens. We do work in prisons. We do work where we are educating on the laws. Oftentimes, people think if they have just been charged, that they have automatically lost their right to vote. So we've been really on the ground organizing in both spaces, where people understand that they have a right to cast their vote. So voting rights and our policy advocacy, that happens both at the local level, the regional level, and the federal level. So Southern Poverty Law Center has a federal policy team, a regional policy team, and then we have state policy teams in Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, and Mississippi, the 5 states where we have offices. And we are actually working again through that integrated advocacy approach to empower communities through policy. One of the things that our federal policy team does, they are actually working at the federal level around appropriations and looking at funding to strengthen the election administration infrastructure. And they have made a lot of leeways with that. We are actually partnering with a couple of organizations for Alabama. Last year in Mississippi and Georgia, they did amazing work. And I don't know how many of you followed the Mississippi race, but it was really close to where there was a difference of about 22,000 votes. And a lot of that can be credited to our policy team for being on the ground around the election administration infrastructure and the advocacy that they did there. Using our platform to increase voting participation and access to voting through regulations. We've also been doing a lot of work in disaster relief, addressing the effects of climate change on areas in the Deep South, specifically as it relates to tornadoes, the water infrastructure. We're seeing a lot of funding that is being that's not adequately getting to communities that it needs to. And we've been working closely with the EPA around their community advocacy tool because there are a lot of communities that have been identified. They meet the qualifications and the criteria. However, when it gets to the state level, those funds are not going into the communities that have been mostly impacted by natural disasters. Again, through legislation, it is policy, right? And legislation, we work to expand and strengthen voting rights protection. So again, I talked about the restoration of voting rights, accountability issues related to misinformation and disinformation, and also around technologies and the impact on elections. We recently, of course, with the second congressional district in Alabama, there was a recent kind of snafu where people who were now in the second congressional district actually received mailers telling them that they were in District 7 again. So there was a level of confusion, and this happened literally a week before the election. And so people, we received a call about receiving the wrong information. Although they had published it correctly on the website, we looked at the number of people who were in the second congressional district who also struggle with broadband and may not have access to the online portal, but receiving that card, they also would have gone to the wrong polling places. Again, all of these intimidation tactics or these barriers to getting to the polls to vote. And so some of our policy recommendations have been around adopting measures to ensure voting access for all eligible voters, even doing that through entities like HUD, doing that through other entities where individuals understand at the federal level that the protection and you have the right to vote. And so making sure individuals who have HUD assistance, even if they are funded by HUD grants, that they are doing voter education and ensuring that people know what the laws are and their rights around voting. We've also, again, continued to advocate and fight for states to overturn some of these discriminatory and voting and election laws that they've passed in recent years. Our policy team continues to build coalitions around those issues. And so there are a lot of ways that we are continuing to fight. I know sometimes it seems very hopeless. I know this past legislation session in Alabama was really hard. It was hard to swallow and hard to follow it day by day because it seemed like we were taking hit after hit, specifically around access to the ballot box, the banning of books, the shifting of our state library board. All of these things were happening in unison, and having community voices at the table who were saying, we will continue to fight this and we won't give up. And so that integrated advocacy model, we have to keep pushing and we have to keep fighting and advocating at the local level because that has always made a difference in our country. I'll shift now to talk about our voting campaign, and some of you may have seen this. And just a quick overview of the campaign. Overall, the campaign is titled The South's Got Now. It is a communication strategy, and they're working in partnership with our state offices who are doing on the ground, get out the vote engagement. And the focus is on young people of color, 18 to 29, and that's in states Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, and Mississippi. And I know we're in North Carolina, but that does not exempt you all because there are great resources that are available. And I would encourage everyone to visit that section of our website. We focus on education and advocacy issues because, to my point earlier, we conducted focus groups throughout the country. We worked in partnership with Spitfire. So we did focus groups throughout the country with young people. And then we focused it the second round of focus groups specifically in the South. And overwhelmingly, there's this desire from young people who want to vote. However, what resonates with them most is connecting the vote to their issues. And I say this oftentimes when I'm out in community. Voting is a tool toward liberation. It is not the only thing, but it is one of the greatest tools that we have in our toolbox. If you're familiar with a toolbox, there's always one tool that you can use for almost everything, and voting is that for me. And so we were very hopeful by some of the focus groups and some of the stories that were shared, the data that we have from that. And so, what resonated out of all of those focus groups, I just want to highlight some of those themes. One is the long, hard fight. What we know is that the history of the civil rights movement, the Selma to Montgomery, the Fred Shuttlesworth, the Children's March in Birmingham, the Fannie Lou Hamers in Mississippi, all of those things are so significant to this moment that we're in right now. And that message still resonates with people of color, how far we have come, and it's worth the fight to them. And so giving place to that and remembering that our votes have the power to change this history and significantly shifting the trajectory of where we are. I think it was not Rosa Parks, it was Coretta Scott King who said that things shift from generation to generation. And I know we've experienced several blows, over the last, I'll say 8 years because it's been a long journey. But at the same time, we have had some victories that we can stand on and continue to propel to fight back against racist politicians who want to undermine what has been done in this country when we collectively join hands and fight back. The next message that resonated a lot was use it or lose it, right? Again, as I said earlier, our right to vote is the most basic constitutional freedom that we have. And we're either going to use it or lose it. And if we see the camaraderie on the other side of how the messaging is designed and what's happening across the board, but we actually can have a significant voice and again push back, fight back, let our voices be heard by getting to the polls. The message of hope. Um, hope I said this past weekend in a workshop where I just said it by hands and I said, hope is not a strategy, but it definitely is a stepping stone until we get what we need. And so we know I know I celebrated. I didn't even live in Georgia, but I celebrated when Georgia was flipped. But I also celebrate when the two counties in Alabama flipped too a couple of years ago. And all of that is really hopeful. And so we can't lose hope and we can't lose sight of where we want to be, and using where we have come from to where we want to be. And we have to embrace our power. We have to keep organizing at the local level. We have to continue doing things like what Mark is doing, educating and then educating and having call to actions and acting on those actions so that we do change the trajectory of where we are. Because again, I believe in the power of people. I believe in the collective. And I firmly believe that our vote is our voice and it matters. Reproductive rights was another hot topic across our focus groups. And the fight for reproductive rights, again, where it should be individuals deciding and not politicians about the decisions around body autonomy, right? And what we know is that we can win back this right by showing up on election day and voting for candidates in our state who support reproductive freedom. I know on the local level, if we can do it here in Alabama, it can be done. And we recently just did that with a local election in North Alabama. And this candidate ran right out the door on reproductive rights in Alabama, and she won in Madison County. So it is possible, and we have to celebrate those small wins and model those. We decide or they will decide for us. It's our future, right? And the future belongs to all of us. So no matter where we are in this country, if we want to live in communities where our freedoms are protected, in community with each other, we have to decide, and we decide by getting out to the polls. And in addition to the polls, uh, we have to create space for newly elected leaders in these spaces. And I tell people all the time, yes, we can vote them out, but who are we going to put in? And so we also have to be equipping and educating and taking advantage of trainings, because there are so many nonpartisan groups who are they have people in the wings who have been waiting, who have gone through trainings, but they need a little more help, right? They need community encouragement. And so we also have to do that and ensure fair elections across this country. And again, we decide. We decide, or they will decide for us. So beyond the vote, we want to get young people of color all across the South. We want to get out low propensity voters as well. I didn't say that earlier, but I want to add that too. And also inactive voters. And we want to get those out who believe that their votes have power, but not enough on their own to create the change that they want to see. Again, this is collective. It is going to take all of us. The future is us. The future is you. The future is me. It is not us versus them. We have to do this together, and we have to register. Not only do we need people registered, we need them to turn out and consider running for office. And by showing that their collective force can be an undeniable voice for long-term transformative change in our country. And I'll leave you with this: the South's got now. Mark, I'll turn it back over to you.
Show some appreciation there for Taffany. And Taffany, you're going to be able to hang in there with us for a few minutes.
Yep, I will.
So we are going to move into the engagement part of the evening. And to do that, I'm going to show another video for those of you that were around the first time we will remember this video, but this is about how we can engage people and create leaders. So thank you for indulging me with that. So as part of our engagement piece, while I get Tiffany back up on the screen, like Wayne Hell up, what I want you to do is find a partner, sort of pair up together in groups of two, three, four, maybe with someone you don't know, and take 3 to 4 minutes and talk about what you've heard. Some of the things that Tiffany talked about. So reflect on what you've heard so far tonight with your small group there. So, There we go. I'm back. Okay, about 1 more minute. So, we had the sort of conversations together. Now what I want to have is that there's someone willing to sort of share some of their impressions about what they heard, about what they talked about. Maybe. So, we have some,
Many people are not able to control them like they don't have face. But the thing is, I don't even know who you select. I'm here with Melinda, like recently considered, sharing the Democrat, and then one of the Republicans, she's independent, or she's really Republican. So, that, that's pretty much. So, and then it's really clear, different program. So, was one of the universities has zero dollars to you, was to support them, you can power, and put them in place to have that stages. Politically, how do you fix that? You work with that.
So you're able to hear that.
It was coming in and out. I heard parts, so could you recap it for me?
Yeah, so it's important in terms of like, that's one of the things you believe. If you put in decisions, you know the label.
So we're talking about a candidate that runs on a particular platform that you agree with, you vote for them, but then they flip after they become elected. How do you handle that? How do you go about that? What are some safeguards for that?
So, I have some thoughts around that. One, it is something we can't control, right? Um, and I know that it's happened in a few states. And I actually don't know how you safeguard against that because people flip for various reasons. Um, my recommendation is that their role would be short-lived and we advocate again to bring somebody else in. Um, I don't have an answer for that because one, it's disappointing, right? Because somebody ran on an issue and they betrayed the trust of the community. And that's something that we're grappling with now with the betrayal of individuals and their issues. Because when you flip, there is nothing where where you're again, you basically turned on the people, similar to what happened in Florida. It's a little bit different, but same. You're taking the voice away from the people who decided that they elected you because you spoke to their issues and you made promises on those issues. Again, because I'm not an attorney, I don't want to speak to that, but and I don't think that there are many legal ramifications that you can take for that. So I wish I had a more helpful answer, but that's not something that I deal with on a day-to-day basis.
I would like, I should, consider, concentrating on the young people, 18 to 29. And I think that council should be doing more than that. Possibly through people organization or others, Democrats to really use the thing we have. Like you said, and use that to connect and engage young voters and let that be a huge goal. Starting now.
What do we do? We can. Okay, well, let me have one email and step up with the picture. Which is with the legal women voters and what we have done. Maybe is to sort of bring in a practice, someone that has worked locally on the front. So that I will turn it over to you. You just go ahead and stand up there at the podium.
Can everybody hear me okay? I actually am a practitioner. I'm a retired family practitioner, but in this case, after retirement, got involved with the local League of Women Voters, mostly it's being interested in their stand on universal access to health care in the country, which I think is another major issue that needs to be dealt with. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the League of Women Voters is doing locally to protect voter access. And this year, the League is 104 years old. And as you can see, it's not just for women. There are a few of us men involved. And I'm learning about the organization. I've learned a lot over the past year because I've been part of the management team for the Piedmont Triad chapter of the League of Women Voters. The League functions as a grassroots organization, which has procedures to review changes in its positions on issues that are recommended by state and local leagues. These are reviewed biannually at the national meeting, and our national meeting is actually coming up in a few weeks in Washington, D.C. Once positions are set, the league seeks to speak with one voice, and that's very important. But at the same time is that it's making that effort to, to have one opinion on an issue. Back home in the local chapters and everything, the same old debates and everything are going on, and 2 years later, it's going to all be rehashed again. Once it is determined what the league stands for, there's a publication called Impact on Issues, and you can get a copy of this for $5 or borrow one from but see where the league stands on whatever issue that you're interested in. As a nonpartisan organization, candidates for political office are not endorsed by the league, but their positions on issues are requested so that they can be shared with voters. And people have been seen in the past voter forums; those continue. Each league tries to find particular candidates or races that are of interest to the public, and then invite people to come and see and hear the candidates actually express their own opinions on whatever issue. This resulting voters guide is published on something called vote411.org, which is very important for everybody to know about. This is a online site that you can go to kind of find out important information about polling places. The voters guide is on there. You can check your own registration to make sure that you're registered as you thought you were. I'd like to mention a few positions that relate specifically to voters' rights of the League of Women Voters. The League, of course, disagreed strongly with the Supreme Court's decision on Citizens United, which allowed unlimited independent corporate spending on candidate elections. Since 2018, the League has committed itself to making democracy work campaign, which included working to limit aberrations in the 2020 census process during the COVID epidemic. You might remember that attempts by the administration to shorten the collection of information on the census. In 2019, in a case entitled "The League of Women Voters of North Carolina versus Rucho," the lower courts found that the redistricting plan put forth by the North Carolina legislature resulted in partisan gerrymandering. However, that opinion was reversed by the U.S. Supreme Court, which judged that issue to be political and not judicial. So they just didn't give an opinion, but allowed the gerrymander districts to stand. The league then launched the People-Powered Fair Maps campaign and engaged in 24 redistricting-related lawsuits. And of course, now it's going to be relaunched again next year in anticipation of the census in 2030 and the redistricting that's going to occur after that. Our local grassroots chapter is the League of Women Voters at the Piedmont Triad, which covers, of course, Forsyth and Guilford and other surrounding counties. We discuss issues and educate the public through interest groups that we call roundtables here in our area. These generally meet monthly, and yearly each one presents a public meeting called Lunch with the League that is open to the public, and it allows us discussion of a particular issue. In the fall, I expect we're going to have, I think in September, we will have a presentation by the Board of Elections. There have been significant changes in the laws, particularly the voter ID laws. And then in October, we're hoping to have a discussion on reproductive rights and the interference that's happening between the patients and physicians, ability to discuss things and make their decisions independently. The roundtables, ways that they've been related, or they've been involved in voter rights are, we have a criminal justice roundtable, which promotes restoration of voting rights to felons who've completed their sentence. A lot of people complete their sentence, but as you know, they may not be aware that they're actually able to vote again. But they also promote public awareness that the Board of Elections can provide voter IDs. I don't know how many of you know that, but other than going to the DMV, which sometimes has hassles associated with it, you can actually go to the Board of Elections, get your voter ID made. We have a public education roundtable, which works with the organization called You Can Vote to register students who will be 18 by the time that the election comes around. We have a fair elections roundtable that discusses issues such as possible improvements, for example, ranked choice voting, which is a way of voting one time and let's see, there's a fan back there. And avoiding these runoffs like we just had recently, which are very expensive and not very well attended by voters. Our environmental roundtable is making the public aware of local environmental issues that their votes can influence. An example being the plan for Duke Power to change over from a coal power to a nuclear power plant at Belews Creek. Something I don't think has really gotten enough public education. Personally, I'm in favor of that change, but I think people really need to know, what is going to be in their backyard. The health roundtable that I'm currently chair of will be focusing this year on reproductive rights. And what I discussed about what I see is interference or intrusion of politicians into, affairs that they can only pervert really the outcome, for the patient. That, if they're going to be interfering with our discussion, then we can't really make good decisions with our patients. We have the chair of voter registration who's here tonight, Barbara. She's very active throughout the Piedmont Triad in getting people registered. One of the things that she's been very faithfully attentive of is the citizenship ceremonies that go on and getting the people that become citizens, these newly minted citizens, getting them registered to vote. We also have a voter education committee that promotes that Vote 411 information gathering that I talked about, that produces the voters' guides, and they also sponsor the voter forums. There are many ways that you all can be involved in this, either through the League of Women Voters or other sources. One example of something that people can do that's very important is just going to the meetings, like the Board of Education meetings or some of the other. It keeps people honest, just being there. And we've got a good example of that recently. In Guilford County, we had a couple of members of the Board of Elections who wanted to get rid of 3 voting sites in Greensboro. And those voting sites were UNCG campus, A&T campus, and a recreation center that is in a minority dominant part of town. Well, obviously, just the fact that people came and said, "Hey, what's up with this? We don't think this is a good idea. This is going to disenfranchise, students and minority people," and the resistance went away immediately. But if people hadn't been there and brought it up, that could have been forced through. So very important for us to all show up, and just sit in these meetings and make people know that we are watching. So we welcome anyone to come and join us in our efforts here with the League of Women Voters, and thank you all for giving me a chance to speak on that.
And then when I'm running the presentation, there's no questions in speak of any capacity.
Thank you. Sadly, I was interested in the message on the resume preparation that you should. Could you say again, listed how you identify those messaging items and with them?
So how did you identify the messaging that was part of your
voting kids.
I'm sorry, can you come closer to the mic?
Yeah. So how did you identify the messaging, the hope, and the other messages that are part of that voter kit?
That came from the focus groups. And so when we did the focus groups, they were live and in community. We pulled out those key messaging things from the those that were ages 18 to 29. And we did 35 of those across the Deep South and pulled out the messaging from them. And they were all generated, they all had questions that we asked the same questions of the focus groups.
I'll repeat it, yeah.
You guys, I've seen something that's successful around here, like the Water Streets, a coalition. You know, do you also do that for coalitions in your states?
Did you hear that, Tiffany?
I
So
heard
she's basically, I can think the question basically is, are you forming alliances or coalitions with other organizations to magnify your efforts?
Yes, we are. We're doing that at the local level as well as at the national level. So specifically, I'll use Alabama as an example. Southern Poverty Law Center 2 years ago, um, they the board agreed to $100 million investment in Vote Your Voice grassroots organizations. And so at the local level, we partner with those who are funded through particular grants. And at the national level, we partner with folks like the LDF around election protection. We are also doing some national work with the national NAACP as well as local. So we do partner with also coalitions in community. So there's a voting rights coalition in Alabama, and it's combined of the League of Women Voters, the NAACP, SPLC, ACLU, like Alabama Forward, all of those groups that are on the local level that build up that coalition table that do work statewide and also that has national impact. And I think on our voting rights coalition, we have over 35 grassroots organizations and state level organizations at the table.
And I had to comment that the league also does the same thing, and particularly locally, we're trying to make coalitions with other people. We have to be careful because it has to work very hard to be nonpartisan. And of
Yes.
course, some of these organizations are partisan, but go ahead, we're going to say that.
Yeah, I was gonna say we run into that same thing as well. I know there's a Measures for Justice that has been doing work, and then there's others that are nonpartisan, and like you said, then there's that other group, and so we also run into that as well. Interesting.
Question as well, so okay, I'm gonna ask that. So there's one portion of 70 people in that actual office, right? But the other thing is also the whole limit. And that's something that we always see. There is a strong difference between what citizens want and the kind of legislation that public officials kind of pass. We can see that when it's compromised, abortion rights, housing, etc. There's a big gap. I think they have to be aligned with big business and Stephanie is right. And so, and we have sometimes get people who are elected to office help because based on the money staying on. So what can you do?
Were you able to hear that?
Mm-mm.
Kathy? Okay, so basically the question is, what can we do to counter those perverting influences? For example, money from corporations, special interests that make it so that the people can, the candidates have enough money to run for office and win, even though they're not reflecting the will of the electorate, for example, on reproductive rights.
So I think for us, SPLC has actually created a C4 to try to help combat that. I think at the local level, there are other organizations that would, I think I would urge to connect with and bring in to do some education and training around that. It's very difficult because there's so much money out there, again, that people are using to elect individuals that don't reflect our values as a community, and that is one of the barriers to other people running as well. But there are national resources out there, and I would just encourage you all to I actually can send a list to Mark, and Mark, if you have the email list you can distribute, that would help people on the ground with that.
What is curious to wondering maybe where you have all this, I know some states have, taken some legislative way or round legislation to put on ballots issues that their legislators have put aside. And I know when it's one of the, on these issues and.
Yeah. So this, I'm going to interpret for my wife. We didn't actually have the opportunity to hear what I heard about at our recent League of Women Voters meeting, and that's called Citizens Initiative. So there are a number of states that are able to initiate ballots or that well, make what's the word I'm trying to put forth proposals that have to be voted for by the state, and basically doing the legislature's job when it's not doing the job that the public actually wants. So there's a movement, at least North Carolina does not have that. It would have to change the constitution of North Carolina, which I mean, it would need an amendment, but people are working on it.
Yeah, Alabama doesn't. Of course, a lot of the states there are a lot of states that don't have it, but there is a map too. I think it is the Movement Advancement Project. Does that sound familiar? I think that's where there's an interactive map. Yeah.
There are quite a few states actually have it.
Yeah. Yeah, there are quite a few that have, and then there are those that don't. I think is it 30? Or something like that don't have a district citizen initiative process.
Other questions?
So thanks to both of you. I am the one who said I'm an elections director. And I love to be involved in programs like this where people are interested and engaged and want to do things and want to learn, and you're reading and all. But I can just tell you from being in our office, and again, we can't be partisan either. So I was even a little concerned about being here tonight. But voting is just something so important. Part of the issue that we see in our office, and I don't know if there's any way to address education in public schools, but people who are 18 years old are voting on very important issues and voting for very important offices. And it doesn't matter how old you are, you can still be educated or uneducated. But I really think there's a lack of education, civic education, and not just civic education, but around voting. We just don't see that people understand things that, from being in public schools or private schools for that matter. I don't know, but it's not something that's part of the core education. I don't know if it ever was, but I don't feel like it is now. And people who don't go on to college or don't invest the time to learn on their own aren't going to get that education. And it doesn't matter what your vocation is, how much education you have. I mean, we've had we've had judges and doctors come in and they don't understand what a primary election is. So we do a lot of education on our side, but they have to we can do some and reach out, but we're a very small office. We don't have many resources. I just see a real need of education of how just the system works.
Yeah,
And do you have anything you can do, that you're doing or can suggest as far as public education?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. I think when I was in high school, we had definitely much more than what is in the schools now. I have a 24-year-old, and I know when she was in school, oftentimes I'm in conversation with her, and she said, "Mom, we're not talking about that in school." I'm like, "What? What do you mean you're not talking about this? You have to be civically engaged. You are almost voting age. Why are you all not talking about this?" One of the things that we've talked about in our office is actually trying to see if we could find ways that we add that civic engagement and education to our Vote Your Voice grantees, so that becomes a core of the work that they do, and not just registering people to vote, but actually going into high schools. And we have some grassroots organizations who are doing that. They're going into high schools, they're doing the civic engagement. And unfortunately, a lot of it will more than likely have to happen in community because of what we're seeing being taken out of our schools, and the education. Because even with the accurate teaching of history, if they don't want the accurate history taught, they definitely are not going to teach about the power of voting, the process for voting, because if it's not taught, that also is a barrier. One of the things that a couple of folks said during our focus group is not that they don't want to vote, they are very intimidated by the process. They don't understand the process. They don't know who's on the ballot, and they're afraid of making the wrong decision, so they opt not to vote at all. So it is a real problem. It's something that we're seeing across the country. But we are also struggling with ways in which we approach that. But one of the ways is actually looking at how we can employ that to our Vote Your Voice grantees. And also I know Black Voters Matter is also looking at doing that. And then a couple of groups have also come to us to see if we could partner or provide funding for curriculum for some of our southern states.
I have to interject something. One of the things that the National League of Women Voters is very pro is getting rid of the Electoral College. Uh, when you realize that this next coming election, it's going to 90% of the money and effort is going to be spent in 6 to 8 states, and the rest are going to be ignored. I mean, it just shows you how wrong that system is. And the league calls this their moonshot project, but I think it's extremely important.
Yes, another question.
Many places leave the voters in our state where directors, so, probably the ways. And this is not so much question, but I just want to add one more comment on what they just talked about that should be part of as well. It's not just a matter of the availability of the civic education materials, as Wayne has said, with the voters. We're really hard to develop good civic education materials and have we're with 3 summer interns that are recent college graduates who are working on the strategic plan for voter registration and civic education in high schools. We're really looking for results and the changes that are going on in your county education. Really one more votes of being turned away from high schools and being told that we cannot have access to their students to do something as simple as voter registration.
And we know even fewer have Trump and his city here. We see that people agree
On the borders.
And I remember the registration. Yeah. 30% of people that had the words for the registration, it's around 70%. We're not interested in voting because the candidates are not good candidates and we are not. But I see registered voting as something that easily come up that I really had you actually represent them. As well as it appeals to candidates to be more it's more polarized people that actually win those the whole election. I know a few states such as Alaska and Maine and New York City and then the others that already have these types of voters. Is there a use of companies networking that we give an objective like positives registered study is something that I will advocate for and also educating people around registered study is that work or is it that's worth advocating for? So when the leading have a business on that.
Well, locally, we made a decision to postpone that discussion, not wanting to confuse voters, but that's on our agenda for a lunch with the league this year because it has so many positives. And so, I don't know if you heard, Tiffany, the question was really, is ranked choice voting something that the Southern Poverty Law Center has an opinion about?
It's not something that we have an opinion about.
The history of North Carolina. We did have one office in North Carolina that we used ranked voting. And it was a judge seat, a judge contest, and it had 13 people running to that seat. And I would say personally, I would love to have second primaries because one, how much money it costs, and two, I think that 2.9 turnout, and when I was young, for thrilled that was last Tuesday, it just feels ridiculous. I mean, that might be what you say, but it feels ridiculous. People get $50,000 in an election. We do have how much cost was first. But it's test. It was implemented very quickly. It was very confusing to voters. It's confusing to poll workers to have to explain it. I think it's something that work. You would have to maybe use it for different with a different context. I didn't have to make it. But it was confusing. I think it was happening right away. But you can do that, yes, there was strong and people who that's why we had that talk. He is over now, and another member is the former election secretary of the county. There's some people who are around the country trying to explain it to people. I think that's very good. And I think it's just so confusing and it's going to take some time. I also think it's a political decision, and that's one reason we don't have it. There's a lot of work. That's a little bit of that. But it's something that's confusing that we take some political change for.
So I'm gonna window you down, Tiffany, then bring you back in just a moment.
Okay.
So, sure, right. Okay, so you're right. Page.
What we're having to do is list the contract, this or it. Individually, we're saying it's a DUIs and running out three things that you think you could do to help support voting. Meaning I'm willing to stand. I think they can down, they feel like they can do. It's important to share this because I'm be something someone else did. The money you're going to have. Alderman transportation, people who can't get to the polls. Next one. Yeah, to indicate. Yeah. Indicate over, and then already. Yeah. We can do the thing we want.
Number two.
Okay. So the three, I said, we for good result there. Yeah.
One of mine is, I mean, there might, I don't want to do more education, it's something we don't have a lot of time to do. Because it's almost get ready for presidential, but we need to do more of that through our office. Secondly, I would suggest that any of you all are going to attend a board of elections meeting. You already decided what really voting sites we're gonna have. Whenever they moved it up 3 months, that was sort of a political decision. They decide things, and if they don't hear from you, like you said, they don't know what's important. They only know what they hear basically from their protocol. So whichever one it is, go to some meetings, pay attention to, go to the website, they have to announce everything, they're all public meetings, attend those. And then if you need any educational materials, get from the voters, if you're involved with school, there's usually a group with a college that deals with voting lines. To your local board of elections, call me if you want to. We've got lots of information and we can give out a lots of change for our money down and it's really confusing for voters. So, the more information you can help get out on the board of elections, especially your elections. This is like and maybe just mentor some people that you might know, like some young people like you suggested. Anyone that you might know, 2 24-year-olds in my office that are not excited about voting, and I just said to them the other day, "Hey, work for me." I said, "I don't. You can vote for it, but you better vote." And like Henry said, if you don't vote, somebody's going to vote in your place. You have to make that decision. And we've had local elections that have been decided by one vote. We've done recounts, one vote. And one of these demands literally vote, and then you vote. So you can't, people know they're going to vote, but they don't always do it. And we can talk. I know that in local, but local elections and local officials, really for a while. Federal level obviously does, state level obviously does, but local does more things. I'm sorry, I want to set it off. We get lots of questions and complaints about laws, changes to the law, one way or another. People don't tell us what they think. We don't make those decisions, your legislators do. You have issues, contact your legislators. They're the ones, your general assembly is the one that makes election law. They don't call me and ask me my opinion. They don't ask me what would be best for voters. They're making those decisions based on information from someone besides me and other county boards of elections. And everything, but we hear what voters' concerns are, and they're very confused. So anything you can do to help people is great. I'll sit down.
This won't work for you. Right now, the one thing that you all It might even be something new. This might not come to ask you to share. This is what you hear and everything that's taught. But I'm looking at you, moving forward to address this situation.
We got a few closing comments, but before we do that, I want to again, Tiffany, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad
And
this
yep.
works.
Yeah, helping us through this. I know it's been a challenging 2 days for you, so things continue to go well.
Thank
And
you.
we'll be in touch, and I hope to be able to meet you in person one day.
Absolutely. Thank you. You all have a good night.
All right. Oops. So I do want to, in closing, again, thank all of the sponsors. This is we take on and take on all of the history. The ambulance sponsoring multiple organizations. It's tremendous. And we didn't need their program without them. The most special about life is they found out that they we really you're not many resources for it's an amazing buildings, actual sort of structure. Nothing to permeate the city of Greensboro and outdoor space. And it's got really nervous about the capacity within the building to open it. So that's why I was key, but we didn't the center of the public safety health is a member of the 40 years. That's how those things get but so they can have that. The next step, we did not talk about this further events because of just the accountability about what we do. We're going to put out some either in January, see if they want to participate and what could be some of that activities. Not the like this is phrases based on, but next step about one of the topics that we were talking about. So we are looking for that, we think about how we can participate in all of that. Surveying everyone that is participating to see which of these topics really resonated, and then to have some more conversation about what those next steps might happen to be. Because even in my work of transportation community plan, I think it's certainly here in this stage for fire call. What we actually do to take action. Well, it takes us as individuals for that to happen. The one that all of us thank you all very much for coming out tonight, listening. We have a team back in our right here. Thank you.